Hi, this is Mark Divine. Welcome to the Mark Divine Show. Super stoked to have you here where we strive to be unbeatable, to overcome all of our fears, to be courageous, and to develop ourselves in a whole person, 5-mountain manner, physically, mentally, emotionally, intuitionally, and spiritually. Or what we say here at Unbeatable, we develop Kokoro, which is to merge your heart and your mind into action and live with whole mind. That's what we do here. I love interviewing guests who are themselves unbeatable and doing incredible things in the world. And oftentimes, like today, I'll just share some ideas with you, some training, some insights, some from my written work, some from my work with clients, and whatever is kind of top of mind for me. So once again, thanks for joining me today on the Mark Divine Show, where I'm going to be doing a solo episode, joined actually by Catherine, so I guess it's not solo. Hello, Kath. Catherine's going to pop in at the end, and we'll do some Q&A. So she's going to be listening just like you and coming up with some very insightful questions.
Ooh, sure. Pressure's on.
Pressure's on. So today's topic is the 7 commitments that forge elite teams. And some of those who are familiar with my written work may remember the book Staring Down the Wolf. And the subtitle to Staring Down the Wolf is The 7 Commitments That Forge Elite Teams. So what is an elite team? Some people have an issue with that term elite. And I don't mean to suggest that elite team are better people. They're not. But an elite team is simply one where all the players on the team, all the members, all the teammates act a certain way, behave a certain way, show up a certain way. And they show up in a way that requires an intentional look at how they live their lives and how they desire to engage with the team in the accomplishment of a worthy mission. I had that really privileged experience of serving on an elite team in the Navy SEALs. Of course, the SEALs themselves are an elite team, but within the SEALs, we're broken down into smaller units, just like every military unit or even every organization for that matter. So the working unit of the SEAL team was a platoon, right? And a platoon was roughly 14, sometimes 16 men, sometimes a little bit less if you had an injury or whatnot, but right around 14 guys. Generally, it was good to have an even number so you could pair up as a swim buddy. So the smallest unit was often just a swim pair, 2 people. And you think about like a sniper and a spotter going off on a mission. That would be a full team right there. But then they're supported by other team members back home and by others in other units in the military and the Navy, communications support, intel, logistics, those types of things. So the team isn't just your working unit. It's the broader kind of team of teams idea that General Stanley McChrystal talked about developing in Afghanistan. And he wrote about that in his book called Team of Teams. At any rate, so at SEAL Team 3, there were really, really, really good platoons. I would call those operating at an elite level. And then there were some platoons that were not so elite. And it was the not so elite teams that were very instructive because you could look at them and really discern why, because you had this contrast between these others and them. And that was very helpful for me to see that contrast. Like, what was it about these not so good teams that was different than the elite teams, or flip the vice versa, right? One thing that I noticed was to be at that elite level required that everyone show up every day and do what the SEALs called earn your trident. And the Navy SEAL trident is the insignia that you earn when you graduated from Navy SEAL training, basic underwater demolition SEAL training, 9 months of the most arduous training in the world. And at the end of that training, you get awarded the Navy SEAL trident. And everyone thinks, hey, I'm now a Navy SEAL. Well, that's true. But then you go to a SEAL team, and the guys who have been there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years look at you as an FNG, fucking new guy. And they could care less about that little gold trident on your chest because you don't know anything compared to what they need you to know to operate at an elite level, like you're a baby, even though you've been through 9 months of the most intense training in the world. You really have no idea. So the best young operators, whether you're officer or enlisted, learn to keep their mouths shut and their eyes wide open. So even if they were new and on an elite team or put on an elite team, it didn't mean suddenly that they were like high-speed, low-drag operators. They weren't, and they knew it. And because they knew it, they didn't hold the team back because they were not going to do stupid things. They weren't going to let their ego get in the way. They were going to be eyes wide open to learn everything they possibly could. So in a way, they had a lot of courage, the courage to take a back seat, even to the enlisted guys. So take myself, for example. I was an ensign. I was an officer when I showed up at SEAL Team 3. And most of my platoon, except for one other, were enlisted. So my boss was the more senior officer, a lieutenant, and I was an ensign. But all the enlisted guys had years and years of experience on me, though I outranked them technically. But I didn't act like I outranked them. I was smart enough to know that these guys actually had tremendous experience and skill and operator wisdom that I lacked. And so in many situations, I let them lead. In any tactical situation or high-risk evolution like parachute jumping or diving at night, they were the leaders. They led me. And at the same time, I was still responsible and accountable for their safety and for the success of that mission. So it's a real interesting dynamic where you share leadership. Different aspects or attributes of leadership are shared. And that means that everybody on the team has to courageously show up to do their part and not overstep their bounds, right? Not to let their ego get in the way. And this act of courageously working on the humility, right? You think about that. Most people think courage is bravado, and it's absolutely not that. The most courageous thing actually is humility. And you develop humility by not thinking you've got all the answers, by not thinking you're always in charge, and by not thinking your shit doesn't stink. And the best way to do that is to work on an elite team with people who are far more experienced than you, in the attitude that you're there to learn and to grow and to be supportive in any way you could. And for me as a junior officer, sometimes that was taking out the trash, right? And by staying later and learning everything I could and taking out the trash, turning off the lights, I actually gained a lot of trust from the team. So that was the second element I noticed was really, really valuable, was trust. Like everyone showed up courageously with humility. And that meant that there was a lot of transparency. And especially we saw that in the SEAL debrief, right? In the debrief, right, we went out on a mission, even a training mission. We would come back and we would take care of our gear first. And that often meant me as an officer helping everyone take care of their gear. And I took care of my gear last. What's cool about that is oftentimes by the time I got around to take care of my own gear, someone whose gear that I had helped with had already taken care of my gear. How cool is that? So we take care of our gear, right? Mission first. And part of the mission is your equipment, right? You can't do the mission without your equipment and your tools. But then you take care of the team. And you want to go through the entire mission. Think about this in the context of your job, your life. Do you debrief your missions every day? Do you debrief your day as if it were a mission? And ask questions. What went well? What didn't go well? And what did we learn? And it was all about the process and not the people. If my team made me think that I was a screw up from all the mistakes that I made, then I probably would have run away. But they didn't. They said, Mark, this is what we observed happened. Let's say I was handling my weapon unskillfully, and maybe I swept the platoon with my weapon in the field, right, which is dangerous in case I had an accidental discharge. And I wasn't even aware of it. But if they had said, you dumb shit, you could have gotten someone killed, and I would have all of a sudden been triggered into some defensive position. And I would have felt, that would, for me, based upon my family of origin trauma, would have triggered some shame. Like, oh man, I'm a screw up or I'm not worthy of doing this. But it wasn't the case. They didn't do it that way. Developing trust meant that you always looked at the process and the outcomes, and you didn't judge the person as being bad, right, for having done it. You're looking for improvement. We used to say there's no such thing as failure, only the failure to learn. So the debrief process developed great trust because you learned really quickly, that you weren't perfect. Oh, by the way, neither was the Master Chief or the more senior officer. They all made mistakes, and they all were very receptive to hearing about it and hearing how they could improve. And then they went to work to improve it because you didn't want to let your teammates down. It's so different than the average corporate culture where people are afraid to call out their teammates who do stupid things because, they don't know how to do it skillfully. The culture isn't set up like that to where you can just talk about the process and the outcomes and leave the personality out of it and just say, hey, the team needs to operate at a really much higher level. So we all need, as operator, inputs, as cogs in the wheel, right? We need to train ourselves and refine our processes and our skills. So the courage to show up with humility and the courage to be transparent and to receive feedback and critique, and the courage to really lean into making day by day in every way improvements, 1% better every day. That leads to incredible trust. And that trust then breeds great respect. I would say those three foundational things, courage, trust, and respect, are really the glue and the grease and the rocket fuel for any elite team, because that's foundational. If you can get those three things down, and it takes time, man, you can do anything. That's the foundation. You can build upon that. Courage, trust, and respect. And what that does, what that allows is, first of all, let me back up. To have courage, trust, and respect requires work, right? You don't just throw a group of people together and suddenly the next day they're operating at an elite level with tons of courage, trust, and respect. It does not work that way. You've heard of team building in the stages of forming, that's putting the team together; storming, that's everyone kind of like fleshing out the different roles and responsibilities, and all the sniffing that goes on. And storming doesn't happen very often with an elite team because everyone is already pretty squared away. But there might be a little bit of just settling in, so to speak. And then there's norming, and that's like, okay, we're all kind of settling in, getting to know each other, getting to see each other's strengths and weaknesses, and where we need to do the work to improve, to develop courage, trust, and respect. And then you get to performing. That could take months, right? Could take months. And when you're doing culture change for a company that doesn't have any of this, you can plan for 18 months of, storming and norming to get to performing, where you have courage, trust, and respect, and everyone's operating at a very, very high level. That is exciting to see when that comes into play, because the performance goes through the roof, right? Everyone is pulling in the same direction and really putting mission first and team second and their own interest last. But it doesn't mean they don't get their needs met, because everyone is watching out for them and taking care of them. So everyone's working in a spirit of harmony and mutual support. That's incredible. Now, what's cool about all of this is it automatically activates something called growth, right? You go to, when you work with an elite team or on an elite team, then you automatically grow as part of that experience. The team is a growth culture. One of the things we do with organizations is activate a growth culture, right? We use Harvard University's Robert Keegan's deliberately developmental organization model overlaid on our Unbeatable Mind operating system. And it is incredibly powerful to unlock and activate a growth culture within an organization. And that's what the SEALs demonstrate. You go to work and you grow, you become different. Like every day you leave and you're a different and better person. And when all team members are doing that, in fact, it's a requirement that all team members are growing every day. And if someone decides that they've had enough, or maybe their shit doesn't stink and they don't need to grow anymore, guess what? They start to stand out like a sore thumb because they're not doing the things that everyone else is doing to grow. What are those things? Well, you're training every day. You're physically training, mentally training, doing the emotional work, especially as we're defined by the by that debrief process when you screw up or things don't go as planned and maybe you're triggered and you activate, or maybe it was caused by some sort of trauma or fear, right? Or shame-based activities that you have kind of in your background of obviousness or your shadow self. All that stuff exists, even in Navy SEALs. And if you don't take care of it, if you ignore it so that it keeps leaking out, then obviously you're not in a growth mode, and you're ultimately going to hold the team back or get someone killed. And so you're going to be asked ultimately or eventually to leave the team. So growth is something that accrues out of having the courage, trust, and respect to show up every day and do the work and do the training physically, mentally, and emotionally, and intellectually. So there's quite a bit there. When you have these four conditions, now courage, trust, respect, and a culture of growth, what then emerges is excellence. And excellence is really where just every day you're really looking at the operations, the processes, your equipment, the tools you use, and even how you define success and the strategies and tactics that you use, both personally and as a team, you're looking for constant improvement. We say 1% a day, just looking for 1% improvement every day, trying new things, pushing the envelope, finding where your edge is, and just riding that edge and getting better and better every day. So that is excellence. So excellence doesn't exist in an organization that doesn't have courage, trust, respect, and a culture of growth. It's just simply impossible, right? And no matter what you say in the brochures, you're not going to be driving and creating a culture that drives toward excellence and constant improvement every single day. And what's really cool now, if you have an organization that's operating at that level and you're doing this every day, well, guess what? There are going to be challenges. There's going to be setbacks, there's always change. Like this is a VUCA world. You can count on change being constant, right? That's the new constant here. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous world. So here you are, cruising along day by day, getting better every day, operating with excellence, your growth culture, got tons of courage, trust, and respect, and you're still going to get kicked in the jimmies, right? And so how do you respond to that? Well, if all those conditions exist that I've already alluded to, courage, trust, respect, growth, and excellence, then you're going to respond with resilience, right? You're going to be able to just navigate your way. We would say in the SEALs, fail forward fast or find a way or make a way, right? You're going to learn how to do something differently, right? Because ultimately, there's no such thing as failure. There's only failure to learn and failure to move forward. So you develop incredible resiliency to be able to navigate the turbulence and the VUCA with grace and speed. And you replace volatility with vision, uncertainty with understanding, complexity with clarity, and ambiguity with agility. All of this leads to a tremendous alignment because it's hard work, right? To achieve a culture, an elite team that is built upon courage, trust, respect, growth, excellence, and resilience requires everybody is very clear about why they're there and how to get the mission done and what their contribution is and what they need to do to make sure they can make that contribution to the team and not let their teammate down. In other words, everybody is in complete alignment around the vision of what success looks like, around the mission, and around the core ethos of the team. And that's the values that the team decides and declares that they're going to habituate and practice every day so that they can live in alignment with those values and to achieve that mission. So they have great alignment, which then reinforces and provides the directionality for the team. Sounds great, doesn't it? And it's all possible to achieve. That's why I wrote Staring Down the Wolf, to help leaders see that oftentimes they are the biggest obstacle to developing an elite team. If I had showed up on my teams as a leader and I was the perfectionist or righteous or, had to have all the answers and make all the last calls and all the decisions and lead every aspect of an operation, there's no way the team would have ever developed courage, trust, respect, growth, resilience, excellence, and alignment. So Staring Down the Wolf talks about essentially staring down the fears that stand in the way of developing those 7 things, which I call the 7 commitments. So come back next time I do this solo cast. I will be going through each of those commitments in detail, telling some great stories, talking about how you develop each one of them. And the 7 commitments, again, are courage, trust, respect, growth, excellence, resilience, and alignment. Hey folks, look, I'm 60 years old, but I put in physical workouts and a daily schedule that would crush guys half my age. And I plan to be doing this for a long, long time. If you want a lifestyle that defies your age, why not go for it? Then a great place to start is by adding Qualia Senolytic to your wellness routine. Qualia is an awesome company, and Senolytic does something that science didn't even know was possible until a few years ago. See, as you get older, your bodies accumulate something called senescent cells. They're zombie cells. They're old cells that no longer do their job, but they linger in you anyways, wasting energy and nutrition. And as you get older, the more you accumulate those senescent cells. That leads to many of the aging challenges that you see. Poor recovery, lower energy, discomfort, basically feeling old. Scientists at Scripps and Mayo Clinic discovered there's a natural plant-derived ingredient that helps your bodies eliminate these cells. And Qualia Senolytic combines 9 of them, 9 of these game-changing ingredients into a simple supplement. The difference Quality Senolytic has made from my own aging process has been awesome. I'm living a lifestyle someone half my age by keeping these senescent cells to a minimum, so my energy and vitality can stay through the roof. So to feel in your prime way longer than you thought possible, you got to try Qualia Senolytic, and you can get up to 50% off right now. Check it out at qualialife.com/divine15. That's Qualia Life, QUALIALIFE.com/divine15. And you can use that code divine15 at checkout for an extra 15% off. They're backed by a 100-day money-back guarantee. Qualia Senolytic, use it to age better. QualiaLife.com/divine15, DIVINE, and use that code divine15 for an extra 15% off. This will help you feel in your prime for years to come. Kath.
Yeah.
How are we doing?
Good.
Did I put you to sleep?
No, you did not put me to sleep. No, you did not put me to sleep. I was thinking about, we've had this conversation before, and then when I've worked with you with executive teams, one of the challenges or differences that you've noticed in civilian teams versus the SEAL teams. What's like one of the bigger obstacles?
Yeah, that's such a great question. You know, I got kind of hammered with this big one when I started the Coronado Brewing Company, which you're very familiar with.
Yep.
In the SEAL teams, well, let me back up. One of the attributes of really, really good teams, elite teams, is they have first of all, they have an attractive energy to them, right? They have a big vision and a really important mission, like the SEALs or like NFL players or something like that. And so they tend to attract more homogeneous kind of crowd. Mm-hmm. And then there's a long period of preparation to become eligible even, mm-hmm. To become worthy, like in the SEALs. And so that process of preparation and then the actual training programs itself to be able to get accepted into that tend to weed out people who aren't going to operate at that level.
Well, like they're homogeneous, but they're also some of the most diverse people that go into
They are,
teams.
but
yeah.
Right. And so this is an important distinction. You can have homogeneity around the things that are necessary to uphold the ethos mm-hmm. of an organization while having tremendous diversity.
Right.
Right. So imagine, having people who didn't care about working out on a SEAL team.
Right.
And imagine the culture being such a DEI infused culture that you couldn't do anything about that. The SEAL teams would utterly fall apart.
Right.
Right. In fact, there was an attempt to do just that after 9/11, where Congress said, we need 500 more SEALs. And they literally just wanted to slam 500 more people into the training or into the SEALs without the training. And of course, the SEAL says, no way we're going to do that. Right. SEALs aren't mass produced and it would ruin the force. Right. They did that with the Green Berets, and it did have a negative impact.
It had a negative impact?
It did, yeah.
It did.
So let me finish up my thought about that. So because of the homogeneity around the ethos and the fact that there was like a weeding out process, by the time a SEAL team was put together, the operators, the teammates were actually fairly squared away. Right, they're easy to work with, and they had a certain expectation of how to behave and what leadership and being a good teammate look like. In the civilian world, you don't have any of that for the most part. Right, it's very rare that you have that. I mean, some organizations can get that, especially if they're really hard to get into, but for the most part, you don't have that. And when I started the Coronado Brewing Company, I mean, I didn't have any vetting process like that for my partners. And I had an unrealistic expectation about how they would operate, right? Because I had just come off the SEALs. I had been, kind of conditioned to think that people were going to operate a certain way and had a certain level of trust and respect.
Right.
And I got none of that with my partners. And it was really hard to navigate that because oftentimes those things are not overt, they're covert, right? Mm-hmm. That behavior.
Do you think that, using that as an opportunity looking back, when we talk about, forging elite teams, that if you knew then what you know now, if you had done the personal development work that you've done over these years, do you think that it would have been possible to create that within the team, within those partners, if you had the communication skills and the ability to, say, hey, there's some covert things happening. I'm not feeling trusted. I'm not sure if I can
There's
trust
no
you.
question that those skills would have been useful. But everyone needs to be a willing accomplice in the growth that needs to accrue. And I don't think the partners would have.
Well,
these partners wouldn't have been able to go there. So then, you can never play coulda, shoulda, woulda, right? So then, the only question is, would I have partnered with them if I had had a way to kind of discern what type of people they were? Definitely not. But it's not.
No,
it
takes me to the growth piece, because that's kind of where I was pointing to, was that also working with teams, in corporate teams with you, you'll get people that are there because their boss told them to be there.
Right.
And you can see they don't necessarily want to do what's being asked of them on that growth work.
Right.
And so, is that a moment where the whole team, again, circles around them, tries to say, hey, what's going on, and lift them up? Or is there a point where the team says, this is just a pulling us down and we need to let this person go?
Yeah. It's both and.
It's a both and.
Right. I'm always of the mind that, you want to give someone an opportunity to step up and to grow. And oftentimes they will. But you have to have the capacity to have that crucial conversation with them and let them know the consequences of their action, how they're affecting the team, and the consequences of what will happen to them in terms of their role if they can't adapt, right, and grow and become a more positive contributor to the team. We know that energetically, right, every team will essentially kind of lower their energy or lower their motivation to the lowest common denominator. So if there's one person on the team who is operating at a much lower level and not contributing and being the negative Nilly, and nothing's being done about it, then all of a sudden the entire team's motivation, kind of gets sucked, like the wind getting sucked out of the room. Now, if the leader or leadership is aware of this, and there's some, graceful communication around this, and there's some intervention that happens with this individual, and there's a positive response and an expectation that something's being done, then the team can grow from the whole experience, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's some great modeling going on. And if that individual, and they want to support that individual to assist that person to, in their growth. That's what a growth culture does, right? The teammates cover down to help an individual grow, as long as they're doing it in the spirit of like, I really want to grow because I really want to be in this team. If they're just faking it, right, so they don't lose their job, then that gets ferreted out pretty quickly. And that's when that's when it's time to ask them to leave.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's where, because I have a little bit different lens on the DEI stuff, I know, than you, but that's where I think it's really important to understand people's backgrounds.
Sure.
and life experiences when approaching those conversations. Right. I know you agree with me on that. But
I think this is a case where there's really no there's no right or wrong answer. It's really about perspectives.
Yes.
Right. So one perspective is, especially in government and bureaucracy and even academia, is that it's a right to work there, and because of that, then it's up to the organization to ensure that my views and my perspective is included and respected. And I agree with that. Right. I don't necessarily think that it's a right to work there, but I could see how someone would think that, right? Maybe that's how they're taught. Mm-hmm. My perspective, the other perspective, is it's a privilege to work somewhere, and that privilege can be taken away, especially in a private organization. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like for me, I funded everything here in the company that I've operated on. I've taken on all the risk. I've dumped millions of dollars into it,
Yeah.
right? And if someone came and they thought it was a right to work for me, and then I had to bend over backwards to make sure that their needs were met at every level, I would have an issue with that, right? Because they don't share my risk, right? And my pain and suffering trying to get this organization where it's at and to keep it going. So it's a matter of perspective, right? I think there's always a middle ground when it comes to DEI, and it really has to do with your understanding of what those words mean.
Yeah.
Right? Like I believe in meritocracy, not equal outcomes for everybody.
No, I think like where I circle around it sometimes is, no male, and I've watched really interesting interviews around this. Like I'm a female, I've worked in all male environments, right? And this off topic, but most men I ask if they've had certain comments said to them in the workforce, like, oh, go over there, smile and look pretty in this picture. Most men have never had that happen to them at a corporate event.
Sure. Yeah, and
they're like, go get in the photo.
You're really talking about,
that's what diverse. I think that's the
paternalism
part.
is definitely baked into the culture, and I think that whole DEI was trying to push back against, paternalism and the experiences of racism.
Yeah, colonialism.
And again, it has to do with how it's implemented and the understanding of a like we talk about the 5 plateaus, right? There's an integral or higher, much more spiritually attuned way to handle those things than just to come at it, right? To fight racism with more racism, right? Or to denigrate an entire population, let's say white males, just because, they happen to be born white and male. And the white males are the ones who are the, set up and more the perpetrators of the paternalistic system. So, there's higher levels of consciousness that can implement. And when you have a culture, whether it's a culture at large or an organizational culture that is at a lower level of consciousness, then you're going to get all sorts of messy interpretations and implementations of things like that. It's really complicated.
It is. It's consciousness playing out, right? I mean, that's what Carl Jung says. Definitely. It's all consciousness playing out, and the unconscious and the conscious playing out. Well, it was one of the reasons that was part of one of my questions, was around taking care of each other. So the trust piece, and that links to what we're talking about, right? Consciousness, awareness. So I think going back to like your example of being in the SEAL teams, everyone's life is on the line.
Right.
So there's a innate trust that's needed no matter what, I would imagine.
Yes,
I mean, of course, I don't have my own personal experience, but like just from from being around you guys, and then also my imagination. Whereas we've been socialized in the Western culture with this individualism of like, I need to survive, right?
Right.
And so this goes with like, how do teams form in corporate world or in small businesses or even in communities? How do we start to build that trust that like we are better together?
Right.
We lift each other up. If I'm looking out for you, like the way the teams are looking out for each other, whether they're on a mission or not, like I'm going to check your gear, you're going to check my gear.
Right.
There's a question in there somewhere.
No, I know. I totally get the question.
Okay.
So the growth part, right, of being an elite team, right? Now it's not something you do, it's something that emerges. But there's certain things you can do to set the conditions. One of them is to foster the team as a community of practice. Meaning, like, for instance, like an Unbeatable, as our team, we do the things that we teach others to do. Like we box breathe before every meeting. And we practice feeding the courage wolf, right? We're positive, we're abundant, we're forward-looking, we're optimistic, even when things are really challenging. And we really encourage growth. We have honest communications. It wasn't like this in the beginning, but it took a while. But my team is pretty clear. If I'm doing something stupid or if they don't agree with what I'm, some ideas I have, they don't have any problem saying it to me. And I really appreciate that. Mm-hmm. But how many people are open to doing that to their boss, right? So that's a growth culture. So the growth culture, you can set conditions, like have these practices, have a community of practice, have values that encourage and spur growth, even have discussions about things like this is what decisions look like from the highest level of perspective, globally inclusive, do no harm, like some of the, like ahimsa, do no harm, be peaceful, those things. Satya, the yamas and niyamas are great ethical guidelines for any
I think so,
organization,
for
right?
life, for everything.
For everything, or the 7 commitments, right?
Yep.
So we've got these values and we talk about them. And this is what behavior looks like when you're in alignment, when you're growth and whatnot. And so over time, through modeling and through behavior and through course correction, through debriefing, everyone on the team starts to embody the lived experience of operating at that integrated level. And it unlocks accelerated growth in the team. Like you grow so much faster when you're together and working together in the spirit of harmony than you do as an individual. Mm-hmm. And it becomes obvious to you. And so it breaks down the sense of I got to do this alone, or I'm better alone, or I'm always got to fight for my needs, because you have this experience that together everybody is stronger, right? Together, team, together everyone achieves more. Together everyone grows more and grows faster. And it slowly but inexorably breaks down the walls of separation. And you begin to feel I and we, and then it becomes we and I. And it takes a few years.
Ubuntu, I exist because we are, which is an African proverb.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. I
That is
exist
beautiful.
because we are.
I exist because we are.
How much do you think physical health, and I kind of know the answer, but I'm going to ask anyways. How much do you think physical health plays into the person able to be aware of that they're operating from more that first plateau survival instinct and to lift into the other plateaus? And we know we traverse back and forth across the plateaus. There's no there, but
I can't wait to do solo podcasts on the plateaus. Mm-hmm. It's been a while since we've done that, but so the 5 plateaus are survivor, protector, achiever, equalizer, and integrator. Every one of them will have a different orientation to the body and to health, right? If you're trapped in survivor mode, or if you're triggered in survivor mode, let's say because of COVID or an accident or something happening, and you're not normally at an integrated level, so you're not navigating that survivor situation from a higher level, and you're triggered fully into the shadow side of it, then you're actually going to be in an extreme risk, because your mind is going to be negative while your body is going through a healing process. Mm-hmm. And if you have negative thinking in a healing process, you actually are likely to get sick or not get well. Anyways, physical health affects everything, because the body and the mind are one thing, right? Usually we say this in terms of your body and mind are connected, but it's not actually true. The body is an inanimate object. And the way that we even are aware of the body and perceive the body is through the senses. Mm-hmm. And it's the mind that is aware of the senses. And it's the mind that actually can direct the senses to either be a healing agent or a disintegrating agent, right? The body itself is just an inanimate object. So the body, in terms of its aliveness, is the mind. Without the mind, the body is dead. The body is just
And are you using mind interchangeably with soul there? Or is it,
no, well, yes, all together. Okay. Ultimately, it's all together. It's all one thing in terms of the individuated person. So let me finish this little train of thought. The mind, when I mean the mind in this case, I mean the thinking mind, the thinker. Okay. The thinker and the limbic system, the brain is aware of sensations, which makes you aware of the body. But the thinker is not aware of itself. So how are we aware of being a thinker? That's consciousness. That's individual consciousness, which is the contextual awareness that I exist, and that I'm a thinker, and that I have these sensations, which means that I have this body moving through time and space. And now we get into the spiritual realm, Kath.
I'm trying to bite my tongue. Well, who is this I? I'm just kidding.
Well, the I is who is aware of consciousness. Yeah. That's awareness. Right? Now this is tricky, because awareness is non-personal.
Yes.
Consciousness is personal. Consciousness is the one that says I exist. Awareness just says existence is. Mm-hmm. So we have all of these aspects of ourselves. And the soul is is really kind of the intersection of awareness and the individual impulse of the individual consciousness to exist, which you can imagine it like in a very subtle energy, right? It's still energy. It's form. It's not formless. Awareness is formless. The soul is form. It's the first form that we have. And it's the form that threads between one physical body and the next in different lifetimes. So the soul becomes the seed of the mind and consciousness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know why I went down that rabbit hole.
Well, no, I'm thinking about it. No, you did because that's about physical, and then if you think of it that way, I mean,
So the mind and the body are one
then
thing.
if you think of the nervous system, the brain firing, the gut neurons, the heart neurons, all of that, then that seed of consciousness, mind goes through this inanimate, becoming animate object, which is the body, the being.
Right.
And so there's
a healthy mind, one that's growth-oriented, positive, abundant, is very, very clear that a healthy body is required for an optimal existence.
Yes.
And so we used to have a saying in the SEALs, you probably remember this, where the mind leads, the body follows. But where the body leads, the mind follows. Like they follow, they chase each other, like a dog chasing your tail. So, but if your body's broken and you don't have control of your mind, guess what? Your mind's broken.
Yeah.
And that's the state of a large number of people. Their body's broken. Either they're obese, they're overweight, that's the same thing. They're overweight, or they're sick, or they're injured, or they're got some catastrophe after another. And so their mind is always in a state of imbalance and less than what it could be. So it's critical to train your mind to always be positive, forward-focused, optimistic, abundant, and to believe in health, to believe in optimal health and optimal life conditions because then guess what? Your body will follow it because your body is an inanimate object. And so it's your mind that says, I am healthy, right? And your mind that says, I am disease-free. And it's your mind that says, I am, at a perfect optimal weight. For example, I had a client, Eric, what a great guy.
Yeah.
Right. And he lost a couple 100 pounds working with us, but he couldn't get his normal weight is not normal, like his ideal weight would have been like maybe 210 pounds.
He's a tall
Yeah,
man.
he's tall. So anywhere between 195 to 215, he would have been just perfect. But he could never get below like 265, no matter, and he worked out like 3 times a day.
Oh yeah. He was great. Yeah.
And so we finally had this conversation. I said, look, Eric, your mind believes that you're supposed to be overweight because you believed you were overweight from a very young age. So it's your mind that's the problem here. It's not your body. You can work out all day long. You're never going to lose that weight. So you have to basically retrain your mind to see yourself and believe of yourself as, lean, mean, fighting machine. I call him a fire-breathing dragon, the 215 pounds.
Yeah.
And so that's what he worked on with his mantra and with his visualization. And it ultimately it's worked.
It did. I think that with all the messaging that comes in about where you're supposed to be at a certain age and, this is what you can do to feel healthy, happy, thriving. I find that all the enemy through because it's conditioning me actually to think that I'm going to decline.
Right.
And I'm really aware of that.
Aging is a story that doesn't have to be true for you.
mean, I'm very aware of that when I watch those things. I'm like, wow, look at them just feeding us this information as if it's true. I mean, and it's doctors and, experts and it's.
Most people would have no, they just would completely reject the idea that it's your mind that causes the aging.
Yeah.
Right. But I know that's true.
Yeah.
I know that's true. And I've met people who believe that way. They believe that it is, that you can have optimal health until your last breath. I told the story the other day about Sadhguru's. He's a yogi, author, funny guy. His teacher / guru was 90 years old and ran an Ayurveda clinic on Sundays out of his house. Well, this guy did 1,008 sun salutations a day.
That's so many.
That's a lot. You know, I
It
remember.
used to take us like an hour and a half to do 108.
I know. When I did 300 burpees every day, I thought that was a lot.
That was
I'm thinking,
a lot, yeah.
1,008 sun cells is like doing 1,000 burpees almost. Anyways, one day, he was out of town and the train broke down. And, you know, he was with a friend and the friend was like, oh, I guess we'll have to cancel. You'll have to send a message back to cancel the Ayurvedic clinic tomorrow. And this guy was like, screw that. And he ran along the railroad tracks for 40 miles.
Wow.
At like 90 years old and got in like right in time to open up the clinic and then saw patients all day long.
Yeah.
Now, that is what I'm talking about. He had this belief that the body could be optimally healthy to your last dying day. Yep. And yogis are like, they push the envelope. There's stories of yogis who live a very long time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually just saw a yogi, and I don't remember how old they were saying. It was well past 100, doing a physical demonstration.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
In India, it was just beautiful. It was like He was like in these deep squats and just showed like the nature of it. I mean, we could talk about this forever because it's one of our favorite conversations.
We should wrap up pretty soon.
Should wrap up. I'll leave you with my final question, which is about. I wanted to give a shout out to Lisa Leahy and Robert Keegan for their work because you had mentioned them.
Yeah, I forgot to mention Lisa.
And with the growth mindset, and they came out with their follow-up book, which I know you use when you work with organizations now. And I've learned a lot about when I did my master's and I've done some work is the immunity to change. That's because I really, you know, in my own self, and I feel like I've always been on a growth mindset more or less for a good portion of my life, but I still hear that like, I don't wanna.
Resistance, the voice of resistance.
Yeah, so I just thought that it'd be kind of fun to wrap up on that. Like if you have individuals, teams, you know, people, and there's that immunity to change, that like the rub, you know, just speak on that for a second.
Sure.
Thanks for letting me ask
individuals have a resistance to change in the early stages of any kind of growth cycle or growth process, like a hero's journey, right? Mm-hmm. So you have call to action, right? You then either step forth to accept that call or you don't. And if you do, and everyone listening here probably is on their, you know, hero's journey, then you've stepped into into motion, right? You're moving forward toward that worthy calling. But immediately you're going to experience resistance because you're going to experience the unknown. Mm-hmm. And that's what fear is. False evidence appearing real, false expectation appearing real, and staring down the wolf. I use the term failure's expected. Are you ready? Right? Mm-hmm. It's another acronym for fear. So that's a better attitude to have. Like you're going to go out into the unknown. You're going to have to learn new skills. You're going to have to find some mentors and guides to help you. And you're going to have to expect failure. And the way you get ready for it is ready mentally. And like in the SEALs, we said there's no such thing as failure. There's only failure to learn. There's failure to move forward, you know, and that means you fall back and quit. So resistance is normal. But ultimately, for someone with a growth mindset, it's futile. You know, like the Borg said, resistance is futile.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if you keep moving forward and keep confronting that which you fear, then the fear ultimately just dissolves. You don't solve it as a problem. The fear just dissolves. It dissolves because you recognize that the fear was all in your mind. Mm-hmm.
And I would say
your mind is the reason, and that's the ego.
It gets more painful actually to not lean into the resistance.
That's right. That's the more you work with that, Kath, the more you can't not move forward.
Yeah, once you're awake to it, it's like, oh man, like I'm doing this. You're conscious of the I don't want to. Right. So there's the stagnation feels so uncomfortable at that point.
It's sort of like working out, right? Yeah. So anyone who has achieved like elite level exercise or fitness program or athletics, you get to this place where like training is as important as eating and sleeping, and you still experience a little resistance, but you just turn that into motivation. Mm-hmm. So instead of resistance that says, oh, I can't do it, the resistance now is experiences as excitement. Like, I got to do this, right? And then you get into the workout and you burn through the early stages, and then it becomes joyful. And you couldn't imagine, you know, practically a day without working out. You know what I mean? I've been 3 months into the recovery from my accident. Yeah. I've trained almost every day doing things that I can do while making sure I don't injure or overdo it with what I can or shouldn't do. So overall growth, physical, when you talk about growth at a holistic, integrated level, which is like the mental and emotional part is actually way harder than the physical part. And the resistance is all ego.
Yeah.
I love the saying that resistance or ego is resistance to life. Right? Life is trying to be lived. Like the calling is
the false ego or the negative
the ego, right? Meaning like the personality. Like
I'm a fan of the good ego.
Well, we'll call it higher self.
Okay.
The lower self ego is all about safety. It is all about staying in the comfort zone.
Yes.
So that's why if you're really living out of your lower self ego, you're not going to grow. You're not going to change because it's too hard. It's too risky. So it's way easier to just show up every day doing the same things you did yesterday, thinking the same thoughts you had yesterday, because even if it sucks, it's comfortable. And so you just repeat the same patterns and then complain about it and play the victim because you're not going to do anything about it. But when you step out in the growth mindset path, you have to do something about it because it's like suffering to stay in that pattern. It's not working for you anymore.
Right.
So you overcome that resistance by going on this hero's journey. And you don't have to do it alone. That's where a team is so important. Like you don't need to do it alone. Nothing worthy, including your own growth, is done alone. You need mentors, guides, support. You need teammates.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And for great teammates, you need courage, trust, respect, growth, excellence, alignment, and resilience. Hoo-yah. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate you being here. And thanks for tuning into the Mark Divine Show. I appreciate you walking this path of leadership, growth, and impact with me. If this episode moved you, share it with your fellow warriors. And don't forget to leave a review wherever you listen. If you'd like to go deeper into understanding the principles that I discuss here on the show, check out unbeatablemind.com and explore how you can work with me and my team directly in our personal leadership development and transformation programs. And follow us on Instagram at Mark Divine Leadership for more insights. So until next time, forge an unbeatable you. Hoo-yah. Have you ever wondered what it takes to become an unbeatable leader? I'm Mark Divine, and my journey from the relentless discipline of SEAL training to coaching elite leaders has shown me that true mastery comes from within. And in 2025, I'm offering an exclusive opportunity, 3 VIP coaching spots for a 6-month transformational experience where I work with top-tier leaders like you. My coaching has empowered leaders at organizations such as Google, Nike, Slack, Boeing, and even Harvard to build the discipline of a SEAL, to master what I call the 5 mountains and the 5 plateaus, and create a life of unparalleled success and fulfillment. This isn't just another program. It's a chance to evolve into the kind of leader who commands respect, drives extraordinary results, and inspires change. So if you're ready to break through your current limits and elevate your leadership, visit markdivine.com/coaching. Complete your application and let's set up a call to explore your potential. Your transformation awaits. Embrace the challenge and become truly unbeatable. If you're ready to dominate your year, head to markdivine.com/coaching to learn more and fill in your application today.